Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Winning Drive podcast. I'm Reeta Hubbard, the NFL chick, co-host of the Glenn and Reeta show on 105.7 The Fan, with my guy Cordell Woodland from Shaking It Up Sports and the Ravens reporter for 105.7 The Fan. We hope that you guys enjoyed your bye week, as it was, I like to call sucker-free Sunday or stress-free Sunday, but back to business, it appears. The Ravens will be back this week to practice and get ready for their final stretch against these tough opponents coming up. So currently, right now, after the bye week, Miami holds the number one seed because they have a better conference record of 2 losses as opposed to the Ravens' 3 conference losses. But they got a lot of help over the weekend, Cordell. The Steelers lost to the Cardinals. The Browns lost to the Rams. So that takes them 1 game down. We have yet know to what is going to happen with the Bengals outcome, but the Chiefs, who was also in the running for the top seed, lost to the Green Bay Packers on Sunday night. So the Ravens have a tough stretch coming up, but also they have 3 conference losses. Every single loss that they had came from the AFC. So when you look at this schedule and you look that they only have 2 NFC teams left, to my knowledge, Cordell, which is the Rams and the 49ers. Do you think that the Ravens have a chance to get a top seed? And what needs to happen in order for them to get it? By the way, they do play Miami, who currently has the 1 seed.
Right. Yeah, I mean, they definitely have a chance. Like you mentioned right there, they played the team that's sitting up there. They play the Jags, who also will be, potentially sitting in front of them, depending on what happens this week. So yeah, I mean, I do think they have a chance. I think it's a crapshoot for any of these teams right now. I mean, the AFC, it changes by the day, and the Chiefs are starting to kind of show, that they are human with some of these late game type of things that are, I think, coming back to bite them. But yeah, I think the Ravens are good enough to beat any team that they play. Obviously, the one against the Niners is going to be super tough, but like you said, that's an NFC game. You love that, but ultimately, we're getting to that time of year where you don't want to lose any games right now. Everybody's in the thick of the playoff race, and a simple loss could really weigh a lot when it comes to not only seeding but just your spot in the postseason around this time of year. So, yeah, I mean, I think the Ravens are good enough to play with anybody, good enough to beat anybody. Will they do it is another question. I mean, you can make the argument everybody that they've lost to, they're better than. So them being better than teams really doesn't mean anything. It just really boils down to who's going to get it done on game day and who's going to be able to go out there and, make the winning plays when it counts.
I have an unpopular opinion that I'd like to share with you, and I'd like to share with the listeners of the podcast.
Cool.
I am not pressed that the Ravens get a number 1 seed. In fact, I'm not sure I want them to get a top seed, quite frankly. I mean, it does, yes. Does it mean that you get playoffs, that you get the entirety of the playoffs with a number 1 seed? Sure. The bye week is where I'm like, if they get it, they get it. If they don't, they don't. This is why. The Ravens have an extremely late bye, the first week in December. And to the point where I just kept forgetting that they did not have a bye, Cordell. I literally just kept saying, why do y'all keep saying the Ravens are number 1 seed? Because they have more wins because their bye isn't until December. So they only have 5 games remaining, okay? Whereas everybody else has, numerous games remaining. My concern is that having another bye in such short timing could affect, to me, how they go into the playoffs. I think that if your momentum is high, having a bye is probably not something that you want. And I say this maybe as an Orioles fan, potentially, because we saw the Orioles have a little bit of rest because of wild card weekend, and then they got swept, right? So it's very possible that I am using this logic because I saw this happen in baseball and it didn't bode too well for the teams that didn't play wild card weekend. But ultimately, I just feel like if you only got 5 games remaining, having another bye week, is that going to obviously it helps if you got guys that are injured, right? It clearly helps those guys try to get better, and then they have an extra week off. But for me, if you're driving with momentum with the schedule that the Ravens are having, my concern is that it messes up the momentum. And I don't know if it's necessary because you had such a late bye to begin with. I could be wrong. Again, this is an unpopular opinion. I understand everybody wants the 1 seed. I understand that you want the entire playoffs at M&T Bank Stadium. Completely understand. I would love it too. But I'm used to the Ravens not having playoff games at home, so that doesn't bother me. They tend to have played better on the road when they've had playoff games. Even their last playoff game with Lamar playing against the Titans was away at Tennessee. So I just, I am very indifferent about this number 1 seed. I don't expect people to agree with me. I just feel that, having such a late bye means that you really don't have a need to have another bye less than 6 weeks later. That's just where I stand. I just think if the Ravens are good enough to play with anybody, whether it's home, away, whatever. I don't really care. So for me, it's just only for selfish reasons we want the number 1 seed, which is completely okay with me, right? I'm completely okay with people wanting to have a home game, which you'll get if the Ravens win the division anyway. But I just don't. I don't care enough about the 1 seed like everybody else.
I mean,
does.
I definitely can see what you're saying, and I agree with the notion of you don't know how the bye is going to affect you as a team. You can go back to 2019. I know nobody likes to go back then, but they had the bye that year too, and came out very flat in the loss against the Titans, and that is a true concern. I guess on the flip side, this is a team that they have a lot of veterans.
They do, and that's
on
fair.
this team, and they do have a lot of guys that are playing through injuries. So just how we all thought that this bye week may be too late, it ended up coming right on time. Maybe that's another situation. They get the bye week going into the playoffs if they do get the 1 seed. I'm sure they're not going to be upset about an extra week of rest. Ronnie Stanley isn't going to complain about an extra week of rest. He's one of many that may not. But I'll also say when it comes to the home field, I agree. I think the Ravens can win anywhere. I mean, historically, the Ravens have shown that when they're on the road in the postseason, that's when they're probably at their most dangerous. I would just say that in certain matchups, like a possible matchup against Miami, you would much rather get Miami and Baltimore and have them to come out here and deal with that cold weather and everything than going to Miami and playing. They're a different beast at home. I don't think Miami is the same type of team when they're playing quality opponents to begin with. But when you get them to go on the road, especially the cold weather cities, they just aren't the same type of team. They're the only ones, honestly, in the AFC that I look at and say, I probably don't want to go there. I mean, Kansas City obviously is another one. I still want to put respect on their name because until somebody dethrones them, they are the champs. But I think the Ravens could go to Kansas City and beat them the same way that Cincinnati did a couple of years ago. I think the Ravens could beat them at home as well. But Miami is the only team in the AFC where I would be a little hesitant to have to go there to play them, just because they're a tough team to deal with regardless. But you feel much better when you can get them at home. But I agree. I mean, I don't know how the bye week you mentioned the Orioles. We've seen a bunch of different teams be affected by the bye weeks differently. Some teams like Kansas City have been good.
The 2019 Ravens out of my memory, Cordell.
Yeah, I mean,
so you reminded me.
Yeah,
how the
that
bye
team
week went.
Right. That team definitely comes to mind. But like I said, I mean, it is teams that do good with the bye week. But ultimately, look, either you got to win at that time of the year, whether you get a bye week, whether you don't, whether you got to go on the road, whether you got to play at home. I kind of throw that stuff out the window. I don't usually give passes. It's okay to acknowledge it. Like what you mentioned, the Orioles, like it's okay to acknowledge it, but in no way do I give the O's a pass for getting swept because they got extra rest. Like, no, I'm not going to shed any tears for you. So, yeah, I mean, everything's got a pro and a con, and I don't really think this is any different.
Yeah, no, for sure. Again, I don't expect everybody to agree with me on that, and it's just a theory that I have personally. Um, while of course I would love to see the Ravens, I don't think I'm having this conversation if they had their bye a month ago. I think I'm having a completely different conversation. But I just hope that with the gauntlet of games that they have coming up, if they're able to at least come out 3-2 or better, then I feel like you got to just keep the ball going, keep the ball rolling, and that's just kind of where I am with that. We'll talk more about what the Ravens are doing on offense when we come back here on Winning Drive. So I don't know if you guys noticed. I'm sure a lot of you did because I definitely was one of them. But Keaton Mitchell was the starter for the Ravens during the Chargers game. We didn't see Gus for a couple of series after that, but Keaton has obviously elevated his role into this offense. What do you foresee as Keaton Mitchell being the starter? Do you think that this is a good idea? Do you think that they should be more even killed in terms of carries? He and Gus sprinkle Justice Hill in. What is it about this? Or do you think that Gus deserves to continue to be the starter? Or do you think that this is a situation where just depends on the matchup, depends on who's the starter?
Yeah, I think that's how they're going to approach it. I think that they're going to treat this as matchup based. I
Yeah.
think, to be honest, I don't think it really matters who starts. I think when you look at it at the end of the day, Keaton Mitchell finished with, I think, 11 total touches in the game, maybe. I think it was 11 total touches, 9 carries, and two catches. Gus is right there behind him with 9 touches. And then I think Justice Hill has 6 touches in the game. I mean, I think that's the type of balance you're going to get. I think everybody's looking for Keaton Mitchell to get more opportunities, and he should. Um, but we've seen in the past with the Ravens that, just because we believe people should get more opportunities doesn't mean that they will. How many years were people wondering when J.K. Dobbins was going to get more than 15 carries, and then he
Mhm,
finally does, and he cap him at 18 or 19, whatever the number was.
mhm.
He doesn't really get much further than that. And that was in a run heavy offense, and so I look at it even similarly right now, and it's good that Keaton Mitchell has shown himself to be an efficient back. He finds ways to get big plays out of his limited opportunities, and I think that's going to be the case for him. I don't think it'll ever be a situation to where people are truly satisfied with how much he gets the ball, because
Yeah,
just like how we talk about in the pass game, there's only one ball. Lamar's got to get his carries. Gus has got to get his carries. They're still finding ways to put Justice Hill out there. Zay is getting end around carries. I mean, this is the reality. So Keaton, as dynamic as he has shown himself to be, I don't know if we'll see Keaton be a guy that's consistently getting over 12 touches. I honestly don't. And that's not to take away from what he can do or what he has done. I'm just going off of the way that the Ravens have historically handled these backs, and B, just what they've done just this season alone. Even in the
right.
Chargers game where he started, I think that they felt like his style of play was more beneficial to their game plan against the Chargers than Gus was. I mean, it took a while for Gus to even get in the game, to the point to where people were wondering if Gus was being punished for something. So I don't think that Keaton will just be the workhorse back. I don't think that's the way the Ravens will go about it with any of these guys. But I'm still looking at Gus for short yardage, still looking at Gus for red zone. And Gus has shown himself to be able to make some plays in the passing game as well. Obviously, Keaton has a higher ceiling when it
Right.
comes to catching the check downs. But with Keaton, I think it's going to come down to, can he pass protect to keep him in the game on third downs? Do they trust that he knows his assignments thoroughly?
Yeah.
Because Harbs has said in the past, they have to kind of train themselves to start trusting this young guy, because they don't know how much he can handle. He wasn't there for the back end of training camp and stuff, and or the back end of preseason, because he got hurt in the Washington game. He missed pretty much the whole first half of the season. So I just think it's a lot of combinating factors that are going to contribute to the decision of how much Keaton plays. But ultimately, I think it's going to be even across the board.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do think that finding a way to make sure that the young man can pass protect is something that they're going to be watching, because at times he's missed some assignments, and I think that that's normal. I mean, he's a rookie; he's still figuring things out. And I think that the matchups do matter, right? I guess they felt like for the Chargers game, they felt like he should have started. I definitely think that Gus is the guy that I still don't think Gus, he should always be the starter to me. I don't care if Keaton ends up getting more carries. Gus should be the starter. He's earned that financially. He's earned that right. Carry wise, he's earned that right, because all Gus Edwards got to do is lean forward. He's going to give you 4 or 5 yards. He don't have to do much. It don't even require a lot of effort from him. You know what I'm saying? But that's the type of guy that he is. That's the type of player that he is. And that's extremely important to have, in certain situations. So, I have no problem with Keaton Mitchell getting increased carries. I think that he's earned the right to get increased carries. I think that he's done a really good job with the load that he's gotten. But I also think that there is absolutely a time and place for Gus. And I agree with you. Obviously, the red zone, short yardage situations, but Gus can still, Gus, we know what he can do in pass protection. We know that Gus can, catch the ball too out of the backfield. We've seen long plays from Gus coming, catching the ball. So it's possible. But this is obviously what they wanted, I think, with JK, what they got with Keaton Mitchell, which is a nice mix in terms of running backs. They got the big bruiser. They got the guy that's just going to go straight. You know what I'm saying? He ain't going to do no east and west. He going to go straight forward. You're going to get what you're going to get from that. Or you got the guy that's more elusive, that can make guys miss, that what they wanted JK to do. And like you said, potentially catch passes out the backfield. So, I definitely don't have an issue with, I still think that Gus should be the starter, named as a starter, because I think he's earned that right. But I also don't have an issue with Keaton Mitchell if he ends up getting more carries, because if the game says that this is his type of game, then you got to give it to him. You know what I mean? You got to go with the hot hand. But to me, this is just all formalities at this point. When you start looking at their carries, it's not like, oh, Gus ended up having a whole lot less carries than Keaton Mitchell, and so forth and so on. This is just simply a formality. Who do they consider to be the guy that is better suited for the matchup in which they're playing? Doesn't mean that Gus by any means is not going to be a part of it. Although I still didn't like the fact that they waited so long to put him in that Chargers game. Could have put him in.
And it was times where they were using Justice Hill, and times where it's like, where is Gus?
Yes.
Where's Gus at? But look, I don't really have an issue with it. Like you said, I don't mind. I honestly feel like Gus should probably be the starter as well. But ultimately, I don't really care as long as they can accurately dictate the game flow. If the game is if the game flow is going and you see that Keaton is the hot guy, then you got to ride the hot hand. That's my only concern, is if Keaton is hot, are they going to be able to go away from the veteran and Gus and stick with Keaton if he's having one of those games where he's getting like 8-9 yards a pop? Are you going to stick with him, or are you going to continue to go with just the person you feel more comfortable with in Gus and throwing him out there despite Keaton clearly showing you he's in a groove? That's my only issue. Just dictate the game flow properly.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And just, for reference, even though Keaton was the starter, he had 9 rushes last week in the Chargers game, and Gus had 8. So, I mean, it's not like that. Again, he's taking like a ton of carries off of him. And I think that it's fair to acknowledge too, with Gus's injury history, you want to not give him as much of a load that you'd like. It's nice to have a nice little bit of balance in between what they can do, and then they still have Justice Hill if they need to. So again, I don't think that they're going to be like stealing a bunch of his carries to give to Keaton Mitchell. This is a team that runs the football. We know that they like to do that. So he's still going to get his, but I definitely think that this is all predicated on what the matchups are and what they consider to be favorable. So we'll see. They play the Rams this weekend. We'll see, what they decide to do there, because you got Aaron Donald on that front line for the defense of the Rams. We'll see what they decide to do and what they consider to be the best situation. When we come back, we'll talk about a potential addition to the Ravens? What do you guys think? We'll talk about that coming back from Winning Drive. So, of course, Cordell, everybody has heard now that Zach Ertz and the Cardinals have mutually parted ways. He is currently a free agent, and Zach Ertz is looking to, like anybody right now, that's a free agent. I mean, this is not a crazy thing, looking to go to a contender. And of course, one of the teams that was named, in addition to his old team, Philadelphia Eagles, were the Baltimore Ravens. So I want to know, do you think Zach Ertz would be a good pickup for the Ravens, or do they just stick with the guys that they currently have?
I don't think it would hurt. If you could get him for a nice, something obviously team favorable at this point in the year. I'm sure is you don't have to break the bank to get him. Um, but I don't think it would hurt to have some sort of depth, to be able to have a veteran presence in the tight end room, a guy that's won a Super Bowl, a guy that's been the number one option. Maybe not the number one option, but definitely one of the top options in the offense. Zach Ertz has got a couple of he's got what 1,000 yard season, over 1,100 yards in
Yeah.
2018. For Zach Ertz, I mean that's pretty good. But this is a dude that has shown the ability to be relied on in an offense. Obviously, he's a little far removed from that. He's not that guy anymore, but I thought he was decent last year in Arizona. He played in 10 games, had 4 touchdowns, over 400 yards receiving. A lot of the Arizona Cardinals guys' stats, receiving guys' stats, are going to be skewed because there's a time when Kyler Murray's there, and there's a large chunk of time where he's not. So it's tough to really go off of the numbers for quite a few of those guys out there. But all in all, look, I don't think if the Ravens did bring Zach Ertz in, I don't think it's a situation where you're plugging and playing him over Isaiah Likely. I don't think that'd be the case. I think Zach Ertz would just be a depth guy. He'd help you in the red zone, help you in short yardage, another quarterback-friendly guy that's working in the middle of the field. How healthy he is a big question as well, because he's dealt with a lot of injury issues the last couple of years. But overall, I don't think it's a bad thing if they get Zach Ertz. Again, for a team-friendly situation, and understanding that he's here for depth, not here to be Mark Andrews, right? I mean, I don't think I wouldn't put him in over Isaiah Likely over the depth chart. Now, Charlie Kohler, we'll see. Maybe there. But yeah, I don't think this changes things for Isaiah Likely if you bring in Zach Ertz.
Yeah, I'm indifferent about this. If they do it, cool. If they don't, I don't really care. I mean, I don't think, like you said, this changes a whole needle if he does get added to this roster. He's not going to jump above Isaiah Likely, in my opinion, which is why I'm indifferent about it, right? Because if I don't think that he's better than the current guy that they have, then why am I pressed to have this? I think that we are enamored with Zach Ertz because we know his name. We know at one point he was an extremely dominant tight end. But this is his 11th season. He came out in 2013. So we have to be remembering of the fact that, he ain't no spring chicken. And yes, I agree with you that, if you look at, what he did in Arizona the past few years wasn't great because, of the quarterback situation. I'm a little skewed about that. I agree, but also usually tight end is the guy that backup quarterbacks go to the most, right? To kind of get things going. And look, he only played 10 games last year. Only played 7 games this year. So there's apparently been some type of injury things that's been going on. I'm with you from a depth perspective. I guess it makes sense, but if he doesn't sign here, do I feel some type of way? Do I think that's going to lessen their chances of going to deep into the playoffs? No, because Mark Andrews is 5 years younger than him in terms of football years, 5 seasons younger than him. So I just don't think that that's something that Zach Ertz is going to immediately come in and have some type of impact. Now, I'm not going to, I do think that him being the veteran that he is does have some type of impact to some degree, right? Like there are going to be some things that he can do that maybe Isaiah Likely is not going to be able to do because, just from an experience standpoint. But I also think that because Zach Ertz and Lamar haven't played together, that's a chemistry that would just have to be built as time goes on while they're on the field together. There's no chemistry that's really been built, in terms of like there's no off season, no training camp, none of those types of things. So that would be something that they would be learning on the fly in terms of their chemistry. Oh, but by the way, they got this big stretch coming down where you kind of really can't be in the position of trying to see what's going to work and what's not going to work. You got to kind of know when you look at the schedule that the Ravens have coming up. So if they get them, cool. If not, I want to feel some type of way about it, Cordell. I just don't.
I mean, I
just
don't
feel
think
some
you
type of way.
should. Yeah, I feel like that should be everybody's philosophy towards this. I mean, at the end of the day, the Ravens are 9-3 right now. Yeah, it's a devastating loss losing Mark Andrews, but I think everybody knows that Isaiah Likely can, fill that void, and then you got receivers as well. I just like I said, I think nobody should be losing sleep over Zach Ertz at this stage of his career. No, nobody should be super upset if the Ravens don't get him. You also shouldn't throw a parade if you do get him. I only at this time of year, especially this time of year, depth really matters, and it's cool right now. But you got to think about the what ifs. Would be my thought process when I look at Zach Ertz. Again, this isn't somebody that I'm bringing in to build my offense around or save the day. It's more so a depth guy, and when you talk about being a Super Bowl contending team, you're going to need people that have wandered those waters before and understand what it takes to play in that time of year and the toll it takes on your body and just the attention to detail and all of that stuff that you need to have late in January. So that would be my only thing. God forbid something happens to Likely or Kohler, and then boom, Ertz is a bonus. He's a bonus there. And if nothing happens to those guys, he's cool. He's there in case you need him. But again, I'm not beating on the table to sign him. I would imagine that the Ravens are at least having conversations about him.
I'm sure. A question that it's kind of relatable since we're talking about the tight end position. Do you think there's a reason why they have not promoted Travis Vokolek from the roster, the practice squad?
But I don't think that there is a dire need to do it right now. I mean, you got Patrick Ricard, who basically can play that type of role as the third tight. Essentially, it's your third tight end, the blocking guy. That's what Patrick Ricard does.
Yep.
I get it. They had 3 active tight ends, before Mark Andrews went down. But there were games where Kohler wasn't active and stuff like that. So I think with Vokolek, it's just more so a thing where they're not in a position to where they feel like they need to put him out there, or a situation where they feel like he could replace a Kohler or start eating into likely snaps. I think that. And John talked about this about a couple weeks ago. It's not when you're on the practice squad, you don't really get a lot of time to really progress. You don't really get that time to really be a part of the game plan, to really be coached up to the point to where you're ready to go out there and play, especially for a guy in his position who's an undrafted free agent. So I just think it's tough right now, because in all honesty, he may not even know everything that would be asked of him if he was to go into a real game right now. Preseason and regular season games, as you know, are just two totally different. The game plans, the preparation, everything is so different. So I obviously the dude can play. We saw that in the preseason. But I just don't think that they feel like they need him right now.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Like you said, having a guy like Pat Ricard, who's already in the tight end room. He told us that on the Tyus Bowser show that's who he watches film with, tight ends. So he has a better understanding of what it is that they want to do anyway. Just doesn't make it a necessarily need to bring up a guy like Vokalek. Obviously, signing a guy like Ertz, you're going to activate all three tight ends. I mean, or maybe Kolar probably finds his way being the odd man out in that regard. But again, while it's a cool signing, he has a lot of veteran presence. He can bring some experience to the table. I'm just indifferent about whether they should do it or not. I can't explain it. I'm just like, if they do, great. If they don't, that's cool too.
I'm right there. I'm right there.
I don't know. All right. On our next episode, Cordell, the Ravens will be hosting the 6-6 Los Angeles Rams. They went from kind of almost being dead in the water to now potentially pushing for a playoff spot. We know that the Rams beat the Browns the other day. The Browns defense, man, I feel like they've kind of given up a little bit since Deshaun Watson has been out. I could be wrong, but it just doesn't feel like the same defense.
It's just tough to defend when offensively. I mean, granted, and the Browns offensively had, Joe was throwing that rock around.
Yes, he was.
But I don't know. I just think for any side of the ball, it wears down on you after a while. You're carrying the load. You're really the team, especially as a defense, because I think in the case of them, they almost need to score they got to score points for them to really be in there. So as good as a defense as they are, it'll be tough for you to really see how good they are on a weekly basis because the offense doesn't help them out a lot.
Yeah, that's for sure. And it definitely probably, like you said, it has wear and tear on you. They've lost 2 straight at this point. So they'll be reeling. But the Rams did what they had to do to help the Ravens keep their spot atop the AFC North. So we'll be having a conversation about that matchup, what we expect to see, how we think that will fare, and a final score on our next segment. We want to thank you all for listening. So from Cordell to me, this is Winning Drive.